Well, welcome once again to our April 2018 Committee of 100 program, What Will Be the Impact of the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act on Arlington? Before starting our program, I would like to recognize all the elected officials who are joining us in the room, and joining us is our County Treasurer, Carla De La Pava. And we will be hearing more from her later. So, as I think everybody here is aware, in December, Congress passed and President Trump signed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, which was one of, if not the, largest changes in the Internal Revenue Code since its major overhaul in 1986. The bill is large, 185 pages in its PDF slip law form, and no, I have not read all of them, and it is comprehensive. There are impacts on personal taxes, estate taxes, pass-through businesses, corporate taxes, investment taxes, a run of miscellaneous tax provisions, I believe so called, and even a section on oil and gas drilling in Alaska. And as befits a piece of legislation so large, there was much discussion as it went through Congress late last year. And as is seemingly the norm for all things legislative or political these days, much of that discussion was at high volume. Looking back, I know that there are some rate and bracket changes, and I know that there were some changes to what sorts of expenses can be deducted on individual income tax returns. Items like mortgage interest or state and local taxes have been much discussed, and I'm sure there are other noteworthy items as well. Now, fitting for a gathering place to learn about community issues, we here at Committee of 100 want to delve deeper into what the law means for us. Now that the tensions of the debate have cooled, and as always, we have invited experts in this area to enlighten us with their thoughts and to answer our questions. There are a number of angles that we are considering. What do the changes mean for the economy as a whole, all the way down to what the tax law changes mean for individual taxpayers such as ourselves. And then there are knock-on effects for state and local governments. How might changes in the deductibility of their taxes affect the tax base or residents' willingness to pay? Might it impact our ability to pay what we owe? And so to help us with that, we are pleased to welcome three speakers. First, we're joined by Ron Kutcher, who is now retired, but worked as the Deputy Director at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. In that role, he was responsible for the program which developed medium-term projections of the U.S. economy, covering the major macroeconomic variables such as gross domestic product and industry output and employment, as well as preparing a range of publications associated with projections like the Occupation Outlook Handbook, which was directed at counseling community and job seekers. All told, he spent close to 4 decades at the BLS. He has also appeared on Good Morning America Today, CNN, and other media outlets, and has testified before several House and Senate committees concerned with employment issues. Ron also studied at the Illinois. Next, we'll be joined by Larry Axelrod. He is a partner in the Ivins, Phillips, and Barker, Washington office, concentrating on corporate tax issues, including acquisitions and dispositions, spin-offs, reorganizations, and with an emphasis on consolidated return rules. He is an alum of SUNY Stony Brook on Long Island, where I grew up, and earned his JD from USC and his Master of Law and Taxation from Georgetown, where I did my undergrad. So we have all those connections, Larry. Larry worked for the IRS, where he was responsible for drafting regulations on investment credit for movies and bad debt deductions for thrift institutions. So perhaps you can tell us if you really can make more with a flop than a hit. And in addition to regulations on consolidated returns, he was a partner in a Big Four national office for over 25 years and has been cited by the U.S. Supreme Court and U.S. Tax Court. And finally, we will welcome our County Treasurer, Carla De La Pava, to give us a sense of what the impact on our local purse would be. Carla was elected to this position in 2014 and re-elected in 2015. Prior to being elected treasurer, Carla served as Chief Deputy Treasurer for 6 years with her predecessor, Frank O'Leary, who is joining us as well, overseeing all aspects of that office, including the installation of new internet-based payment portal technology solutions and an expansion of debt collection, which brought in over $6 million in delinquent taxes and debt owed to the county. She has a degree in economics from Wesleyan and an MBA from Harvard Business School, and has also worked in corporate banking and operations and management prior to her public service. So a lot to learn, some very qualified people to help us learn it, and so therefore let's get started. Please everybody join me in welcoming Kutcher.
Thank you. My background, as noted, is in medium-term outlook of the U.S. economy. So I will focus on how the Tax Act is expected to change that. How was that to be accomplished? Well, in lowering the corporate taxes, they hoped that that would spur investment in labor-saving equipment, which in turn would lower cost. And with lower cost, more products, job growth would follow to meet this demand, and the rate of economic growth would rebound. In the past, we've had a rate of economic growth of 2% per year, and purportedly this Tax Act would raise our overall rate of economic growth to 3%. Now, the concerns of some that the Tax Act and the lower corporate taxes would be used for other purposes than to spur investment. In other words, will corporations use it to buy back their shares? Will they merger and acquisitions increase? And just to note that acquisitions were up 67% for the first quarter of this year. So it's clear that some money is being used that. Well, what affects the long-term rate of economic growth? Well, the simplest form, one can think of it as how many people are employed and how much do they produce for each hour of work, or their efficiency, or we economists call that productivity. Now, in the past, as I've noted, we've said our rate of economic growth is the goal of the Tax Act was to spur that to 3% at a minimum. Some said it would even go to 4%. But we, over the past decade, have only had 2%. Now, why is that? Well, underlying factors, both the labor force has been slowing. The baby boomers are retiring. People in my age group are no longer working. Women's labor force participation rate, which increased very rapidly from 1950 to 2000, in fact, has leveled off, and the rate of growth of that has slowed down precipitously. Over the long run, men's labor force participation has declined. In other words, the percent of men in the labor force has declined. A number of factors do that, underlying that, and that's impacted most those without a high school degree. If you look at it by level of education, you'll find that the high school, those without a high school degree are not in the labor force as much as other groups. But other factors are affecting it also. The amount of disability, people on disability has gone up. The opioid, it's staggering what percent of our workforce we're losing because of opioid. I think the last data I saw was that of the men in the labor force group not working, over half of them were on pain medication. So we are really suffering greatly from that. The incarceration, there are 5 million men between the ages of 25 to 54 that have served their time and are now out and in the labor force. And anybody knows the difficulty that this group will have getting jobs. there's a smaller group entering. In other words, as the older people are retiring, the younger people that are coming in are smaller in number. And we also find that teenagers aren't working as much because schoolwork is so demanding that many of them no longer have jobs while they're in school. Also, immigration. We're doing everything, it seems like, at the policy level to limit the number of. Is this, no, it comes in and out on me, I'm sorry. Immigration, we're restricting both legal and refugees. Black unemployment rate is, in the last month, reached its lowest level that ever measured at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, although parenthetically it's still 80% higher than the white unemployment. All of these add up to the fact that the number of people is likely not there to spur the rate of economic growth faster. With productivity. Productivity has been very slow. The reasons for that are shifting more and more to service industries, and services are much more difficult to automate than production type work. In fact, you and I as consumers may resist efficiency changes in service industries. If I go in and my barber says to me, I can do your haircut in half the time I did last time, or I can do your hair in half the time you did last time, you and I may resist that. Also, we find that the amount of money flowing into R&D, which is the stimulus to future rate economic growth, is slowing down both at the private and at the public level. So the source of future from research and development is slowing down. Well, then, what does all this imply? Well, I would argue that it implies that the future rate of economic growth, even with the tax cut, is very likely to be the 2% we've had in the past. And I noted just recently, two economists, one a liberal and a conservative, made calculations as to the impact of the tax cut on the overall rate of economic growth, and they come up with an estimate that it will only add 0.04% to the growth over this period of time. And that tends to be the consensus of most macroeconomists. Now, why might they be wrong? In what way could they totally be wrong? Well, in my view, there is one way that is if we saw an enormous surge in demand. And what source might that be? Well, I would ability is a large infrastructure program. We all know that we need bridges, highways, water, airports, everything. If the economy, every infrastructure problem we have over the next 10 years, and we're going to finance that, with user fees, maybe there might be some source of future economic growth. But I think constraints on labor will mean that it's very unlikely that we can spur the rate of economic growth from 2% to 3%. Now, these things will not happen immediately. The slowdown will take place over the next 12 to 24 months. And what might follow that? Well, faster growth is inflation with higher interest. The expected increase in the national debt associated with this, I have in my notes, it was $1.5 trillion, but in fact the Congressional Budget Office came out with their own estimate that said the debt that will be added is $2 trillion over the next decade. The problem this causes is, in my mind, it gives us no resources to deal with many other problems. I already mentioned infrastructure. We can mention Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. If we add $2 trillion to debt over this period of time, we just can't deal with these problems. Well, in summary then, in my view, what is the impact of the tax cut on the short-run economy? I think in the short run it will spur growth, but labor constraints will gradually hit, so that in the long run, I think it is nearly impossible for it to go much above 2%, and certainly nowhere near the 3% that some claim would follow from this bill. So thank you very much for your attention.
Now, Larry Axelrod.
You know, for those of you who've been following the news, last week the president had a rally in West Virginia, and he had prepared remarks on tax, but he said, "This is boring," and he just threw it away. Well, I have those remarks right here. But my remarks will be more boring, so we'll see what happens. First of all, the tax bill, the impetus for it was really about corporations, especially multinational corporations, and our structure, the way we tax international operations. The rest of the stuff, the individual things, basically were an afterthought. Before the act, the U.S. corporate tax rate was 35%, which most corporations didn't pay. But nonetheless, it was 35, and there was an incentive not to be a U.S. corporation. They complained about competing with foreign companies. So this act lowers the stated max rate from 35 down to 21. It also did away with net operating loss carrybacks, but I think that's going to come back next time we have a next recession. And it also had other limitations on corporate deductions. There's a 30% now a limitation on interest. But the most important changes really are on the international tax side. What national corporations would do to avoid the 35% U.S. tax would be to incorporate a subsidiary in a low-tax foreign jurisdiction, operate there, and they wouldn't be taxed on that money at the U.S. until they brought it home. So they didn't bring it home. It just, trillions of dollars stayed there. And the thought was, and whether it's true or not, is if you could bring that money home, it would help the U.S. economy. But all the tax rules gave those companies incentives to leave it there. So what this new, what the act did, first of all, it took a look at all their earnings between 1986 and 2017, and it imposed a tax of 15% on the cash they had at the end of 2017, and an 8% tax on the rest of their earnings. And that is due over an 8-year payment period. In terms of future earnings, they look to see, first of all, if it's a foreign company, the first 10% goes at whatever the foreign rate is. But then if it's a low-tax country, it's designed under the very complicated formula to end up with a 13.8% tax overall between the U.S. And this thing is called the Global Intangible Low Tax Income, or GILTI. So people who say tax lawyers don't have a sense of humor really don't know. And there are other, there are rules about intangibles. You know, that's a whole area of tax. There are just armies of lawyers that deal with transfer pricing between the U.S. and foreign companies. They basically lowered the rate that a U.S. company has. I mean, think about a trade name, you know, Coca-Cola. What's that worth? And pricing amounts are a constant source of litigation between companies and the U.S., whether they're overpricing or underpricing these amounts. Because we're going to tax those earnings, they can come back to the U.S. tax-free. What will happen when they come back to the U.S. tax-free? That's not my department. That's Ron's department. If they're bolster the U.S. economy, maybe they won't. Now, individuals, the top rate used to be 39.6%, and now it's been lowered to 37%. And there's just across-the-board reductions in rates. But, you know, if you're a low-earning person, you might save $1,000 a year. If you're a millionaire, you'll save about $29 million a year. So it is weighted toward investment. In fact, one theme in this entire bill is that it taxes capital and the money you get return on your money at a lower rate as opposed to the earnings that people get from the sweat of their brow. They eliminated personal exemptions, and instead they doubled the standard deduction. Married couple joint return, it's now $24,000. So a lot of people now won't be itemizing because when you add together their mortgage interest, their state taxes, their charitable contributions, they may not have enough to be over the 24. And if they're close, what you sort of want to do is where you would normally make charitable contributions, let's say every December, you might make them December and January, the next years you double up for 1 year, and then you wouldn't for the next year. It depends on where you are. That's one strategy for bunching. Now, also, your deduction for state and local taxes, that includes personal property taxes, real estate taxes, state income taxes, is limited to $10,000, and Carla will have something to say about that in the next 10 minutes. And there was a provision called the PEAS provision, and for upper income people, those joint returns making over about $305,000, for every dollar they earned, they had to cut back their itemized deductions by 3%. That's been taken out. So if you are a very wealthy person, this would actually give you more incentive to make charitable contributions because there won't be that haircut anymore. Other affecting individuals, they've raised the exemption for alternative minimum tax. It used to be $84,000, and now it's going to be up to $160,000, and it won't phase out very quickly. And one of the reasons people were subject to the alternative minimum tax was that they had large state and local tax deductions. With those deductions now limited to $10,000, the number of people subject to the alternative minimum tax will definitely decline. There's a child care credit for $1,300 per child, and other changes affecting individuals. It used to be if you bought or built a home, you could take a deduction interest based on million. Now that's down to $750 for new homes. If you had a prior loan, it's not affected. There are a lot of things. You can't get a deduction now for a home equity line of credit loan as you could, but if you have borrowing in place before 2018, you can continue to deduct that interest. Alimony, which for existing arrangements and prior divorces, nothing's changed. But if you get divorced in 2019 or later, the payor doesn't get a deduction, and the payee spouse doesn't get it doesn't have to include an income. Very important, two more things. This is very important. If you're a small business operator, so you own a restaurant, you can, to the extent your income comes up through a partnership or an S corp or a sole proprietorship, and even if you own real estate, you can get your tax rate is cut down by 20% of the 37% rate. So you're basically paying 27.6%. But certain businesses don't qualify, like doctors and lawyers, and there's a specific list. Also, companies that now buy equipment can write it off right. They don't have to depreciate it over a life. And lastly, this was a political issue. Managers, they can still get capital gain treatment if they hold it for 3 years. And my view is that this proves the best Congress money could buy.
Hi there. I'm Carla De La Pava. I'm your Arlington County Treasurer. And the prior two speakers were kind of talking at the 50,000 feet level. My job tonight is to bring it home. And to do that, we're going to talk just some definitions, which is SALT, state and local tax deductions. State income tax and local taxes is real estate and vehicle personal property. Before, there was no cap, and as Larry mentioned, now is a cap of $10,000. I want to make I want to do some disclaimers first. One is I am only talking about personal taxes in my presentation. Two, I'm going to only talk about real estate taxes, because real estate taxes are the big bear in the room, right, compared to vehicle taxes. And the third thing is I'm talking about a loss of deductions. I am not talking about whether this tax bill is going to raise or lower your particular taxes, just talking about the deductions. So what happened to the treasurer's office in the month of December was that people, and it's never happened before, came running in the door to pay taxes that were not due and weren't even on the books. I don't know. Frank, has it ever happened before? Nah. 30 years, he says no. So we took in $20.5 million in real estate tax prepayments. Now, on December 27th, and you can kind of see that really long line, that afternoon, the IRS came out with an advisory and said, oh, you're not going to be able to deduct these taxes if there's no assessment. Now, there's a question about what they mean by assessment and what we mean by assessment. But here's one thing that I can tell you for sure. Carla's not in charge of assessments. I cannot make an assessment, and also by code, by ordinance, assessments, real estate assessments in Arlington County are as of January 1. So I know that there was some grumbling in the community that Arlington didn't respond, but they really had no way to respond. So I think it's interesting, though, that in the next couple of days, you can see people still kept coming in and giving millions of dollars, even after that IRS assessment or advisory. So what that meant was that I knew I was going to have a refund problem, too. And sure enough, people came in and or afterwards and started requesting refunds. So we gave back $3.1 million. It's been kind of like a revolving door of money. But literally, so many people came in to pay. So what I wanted to do in this presentation is to talk about whether Arlingtonians were rational. And in fact, were Arlingtonians even predictable? So first, we're going to start with estimated Virginia income taxes. So I went online to Smart Assets, and I looked, and they had estimates of Virginia taxes at different household taxable income. So you can see here that if you make $186,000, give or take, you're not going to have anything left over for local real estate taxes, which is why people wanted to come in and have one last hurrah, pay them in 2017 so they could still deduct them at least once. That's why they did it. Now, don't worry about this chart. There's a lot of numbers. But basically what I did was I took the median household income per zip code, and then the median property value to come up with an estimate on what the median state income tax and real estate tax would be, and what kind of deductions you're gonna lose. So later on, I'm gonna walk through this for 22207, because that's where we're sitting. But remember this $43,000 right there. So here is a zip code map of Arlington. In 22207, the median taxable household income is $177,000. The median assessed property value is $883,000. That means you would have, if you're the median, estimated state income taxes of $9,496, median real estate taxes of $8,889, estimated SALT taxes of $18,385, and with the new cap, a deduction limit for you would lose $8,385 on your deductions. These are the number of payments we had per zip code. Okay. 2007, we rock. We are out there paying our taxes. But you remember that $43,000 loss of deduction that was in that one zip code? That's down here at the bottom, 22101. So we need to think about that one a little, because you'd think that it was higher, right? You'd think that if they were losing $43,000 worth of deductions. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go back to our map, and it's right up there. 22101 is really McLean with this little tiny piece in Arlington. They lost $43,000 median in $43,000 worth of deductions. So we start to wonder, what could we look at that would make sense of that? Well, 37.5% of the taxable properties in 22101 prepaid their taxes. Now, that's not actually a ton. 6 did, but there were only 16 parcels taxable in 22101. So let's go through 22207 is the next highest at 7%, and we can keep going down. The next one was 5.3%, 22213, 4.6, 4.4, 3.5, 3.2, totally predictable. These in the black are ones that had a little bit left over for their vehicle taxes. So that's kind of what happened in my office and how we responded. I am going to now just throw a couple facts at you that I thought were fascinating. I don't know if you'll share my opinion, but $6,000 was the largest vehicle prepayment and also the largest vehicle refund. 101,532 was the largest real estate prepayment. No refund. $25, the smallest vehicle prepayment. $500, the smallest real estate tax prepayment. $79,000, the largest real estate refund out of a $99,000 prepayment. Sounds to me like he paid 5 years and asked for 4 years back. Now, while many of us were enjoying Christmas dinner with our families and opening presents, Arlingtonians were busy paying $194,433 of tax prepayments online. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Carla. I'd like to invite all three of our speakers to come on up here. As you know, if you have a question, please raise your hand. I will call on you. Lynn will bring you the microphone. When the microphone comes to you, if you can, please stand up, introduce yourself, and ask your question. Sir.
Yes, Mike Anderson. Could I ask Carla this question about the vehicle personal property tax? Has always amused me. Why does Arlington have that? Is there any review of the need for it? And how unusual is it relative to the rest of Virginia and nationwide?
Traditionally, local government in Virginia has been funded by both real estate taxes and vehicle taxes. In Arlington, vehicle taxes bring in approximately $75 million. The decal fee brings in approximately another $5 million. So that's $80 million to fund local government. So I don't know, I mean, it's conceivable that they could change the way they're doing it, but I don't see them doing that in the near future.
I'm Rene Costales. I'm an Arlingtonian since 1973. I have to make one comment because the law is already affected Arlington. And
Please ask a question, not comment.
The question is based on the comment.
All right, briefly, please.
Okay. The effect is the only retroactive element of the current new law has to do with the deductibility of medical expenses. Congress did one change to the 2017 taxes, which was to lower the 10% deductibility for medical expenses back to 7.5 for 1 year. When came the time for Virginia to get ready, they kept it at 7.5. This has caused a lot of problems with software that had to be changed, and the software that had to be changed also for Virginia. So there are hundreds of tax returns which will require amendments. So be aware of that.
Okay, and your question, sir?
The question is that conformity is a very important thing. The main element of conformity.
Sir, please ask a question.
The
Not a
main
statement.
element of conformity that I am concerned with has to do with family size. And since we're in a Catholic institution, there's an impact on family size.
Sir, do you have a question, or are you just going to keep speaking?
There's an impact in family size by eliminating the exemptions. And the question is Virginia going to eliminate the exemptions? Is it going to do like the federal government
Okay,
did?
thank you.
I'm sorry, I want to finish the question. Please let me finish the question.
Please come to your point. You've been going on for a
Coming
while.
to my point. The federal government eliminated the exemptions, but increased the child tax credit. Virginia has no child tax credit. So if it eliminates the
All right,
exemptions.
so your question is, what is Virginia going to do?
What is Virginia?
Thank you. Does anyone have any insight to that?
The Virginia legislature will be the one to make that decision. I mean, I would write to your state senator or state assemblyman and make them aware of the problem that you presented. I don't know what Virginia is going to do. There are a lot of things. Look at the property tax deduction, for example. If your property taxes are more than $10,000 and they have conformity, then you won't even get the deduction for the state. So I would urge the legislature to take action and change it, but that's not something I have any control over.
Yes, and Rip Sullivan was going to be here tonight, but unfortunately, he's in Richmond, I think, helping pass a budget. So, but the answer is to talk to our local legislators.
Yes, and indeed, the governor called a special session, so we had to let Rip go down to that. Gail.
My name is Gail Dennis. I'm curious on the Virginia state tax forms. You just transfer your deductions over from your federal forms. And if the federal deductions go down for people, what is Virginia going to do to compensate the Virginia residents for ending up paying more tax because of the way that the tax form is structured? Thank you.
Well, again, none of us here at this table have the answer to that, and it is something that your delegate or state senator needs to answer. It was not, as far as I know, brought up in the session this year. So there will be only next year's session to deal with that before taxes are due on April 15th, and in Virginia's case, May. So it is something that Virginia needs to look at. And I don't know, if anybody else does, please speak up. I don't know that any other states have dealt with this at all.
Well, actually, California and New York have already, I think, passed legislation, and I think some of it isn't going to work. For example, they set up these charitable trusts that give you a credit against state tax, and though I'm no fan of the IRS on a lot of these things, I think that they're gimmicks. They don't really work, ultimately.
I think the question was about the effect on state taxes, and so was that your question? Yeah, well, the state always has to back out its own taxes as a deduction, so we never got to deduct our own state taxes on our state return. So I don't think there's going to be that big of a problem with respect to that.
Do you have a question you want to add, or just clarifying the point? Okay. Cool.
You did get property taxes, though, not income tax.
All right, other questions?
Over how many years is it going to take to phase in the full alternative minimum tax? Or did I misunderstand what you said about that? And a follow-up question was, for Ron, what I heard you say was that, yeah, what I heard you say was that you thought the shortage of labor restricted economic growth to around 2%. But then you went on to say if there was major infrastructure changes, that could change the result. You could get a higher rate of growth. I was wondering, how does infrastructure spending escape labor shortage problems?
It doesn't, but I think it would draw workers into the workforce that are not now workforce. Remember I said that an awful lot of the people that are not active in the workforce are those without high school degrees. And I think construction is the one area that would draw some of those in that are not now active. Will that spur it to 3%? No, but I think it might spur it somewhat.
And does Mike work? Okay. I guess I wasn't clear on the alternative minimum tax. The rules take effect immediately. It's not a question of phasing in years. It's effective 2018. What the change in the law did was it raised first the amount of the exemption before you even begin to think about alternative minimum tax. But that exemption gets reduced when your income is higher. But it raised also the amount where the exemption begins to phase out. So I think first you're only getting 10,000 of state and local tax deductions, which put a lot of people into alternative minimum tax. You now have a much higher exemption. The exemption amount doesn't phase out until a much higher number. So beginning this year, much fewer people will be subject to alternative minimum tax.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Jones Balarama. I'm the executive director at OAR. We're a nonprofit organization. So my question is, as it relates to nonprofits, is there we're all concerned about whether now that folks are not itemizing, that they potentially will lower the amount of taxable deductions for donations for nonprofits. Is there any research or any evidence, and what should we be worried about? Thank you.
There has been debate, and there was an article in Tax Notes, which if you give me your card, I'll find and send to you, as to what effect they think the raising, the change in the law will have. And my personal perspective, though I'm not an economist, is that perhaps lower income people might not be giving it. But because of the PEAS phase-out changes, I think very wealthy people will actually have more incentive. So I don't know how it'll play out, but I think the changes give more incentive for the rich to give and less incentive for the moderate income to give.
I'm Marjorie Hobart. Advice has been made in several publications for seniors who are taking required minimum distributions from tax-favored retirement accounts, that they might be better served in 2018 to have their account managers make their charitable contributions directly from their accounts, reducing their income, since it is less likely that they are going to be able to deduct charitable contributions. Can anybody on the panel comment about that?
Certainly, if you are not itemizing, then in fact, it's a great strategy. If you are itemizing, then it doesn't change.
Hello, I'm Stephanie Shea. I've been an Arlingtonian since 1994. Question for Larry. I'm curious about the new divorce alimony change and the rationale behind that. It seems to me that just flip-flopping might end up sort of in the same place, that alimony settlements will just be less because the payer is, then having to pay income tax on that. Do you have a comment on that?
Well, I think it's scored as a revenue raiser because right now, usually the wealthier spouse is getting a deduction at a higher level, and it's being included in the income of a spouse who's taxed at a lower rate. With that changing, it may alter, right, the numbers and how you make the calculations. I think it's unfortunate because when people get divorced, suddenly the same income has to support two households, and people are in little tight or economic straits. And I think it was an unfortunate change, but the result, they'll try to tinker with the numbers to try to get back to where they were before. But there was a sort of a federal tax subsidy in a way before, and that is now being taken away.
Lynn Cummings, now what's the really good news out of the tax plan?
You'll probably pay less.
That's all?
I invested $20 million or $17 million, and all that interest is coming to the Arlington County budget.
Duke Banks, I've been here for, I think, 30 years, I believe. A question for, I guess, for Larry, the international side about the money coming here. Has anybody talked about, or are you aware of any discussion, how much of that foreign money or U.S.-based money that could come into Arlington or Northern Virginia, and what economic impact that might have?
That's your question, not my question.
Well, Larry, you brought up the international part.
Right, well, but
Use the mics, please.
At this stage, I don't think people know, at this stage, I don't think anyone knows, one, how much of it will be brought back and where it will land. In theory, it would land with the corporate headquarters in many cases.
All right. We have sold taxes or solved taxes or whatever it is. Give another look around. If not, I'll have a couple of closing words. But before then, if we could all join together and thank our three panelists. And before I send everyone off into our slightly warmer than it's been, thank goodness, evening, just a couple of announcements. First off, hope you will join us next month for our May program, which will ask the question, what's next for the 4 Mile Run Valley? Our county board will be voting later in May on plans for that corner of Arlington. For those unfamiliar, it's a long 4-mile run drive between the Knock and Shirlington neighborhoods. And this is following a lengthy and often contentious public process. And so we're going to be welcoming many of the players from that process and that discussion to hear about what's going on, and will be about a week and a half before the board acts. And that way we will all be able to prevail better upon our decision makers for their decision-making in that process. The program will be back here at Marymount. That is going to be Wednesday, the 9th of May, second Wednesday of the month. And as always, you can make your reservations on arlingtoncommitteeof100.org. arlingtonindependentmedia.org. And as a reminder, anybody who joins or renews their membership online prior to that program or in person at that program will be entitled to a free drink ticket at that program.
We're going to invest our money like Carla did.
We will, George, I think, does a very good job investing in the back, so we will keep him on that. And with that, let me begin our thank you, starting with George for investing in our bar stock and selling us the drink tickets, as well as Doug Scheffler, who led the program effort this evening. He had to leave, but thank you, Doug, anyway, and our entire program committee, led ably by Ed Nolan and Patrick Hope, who is also down in Richmond for the special session. Thank you, as always, to the team at the front desk, Marjorie Hobart, Anita Nolan, Jean Broyhill, and Beachhead, for their work. Our entire board of directors, names you heard earlier, folks who are going to be joining our board of directors next year. And of course, once again, our three speakers, Ron Kutcher, Larry Axelrod, and Carla De La Pava, for joining us and enlightening us and answering all the questions there are about the taxes. And most of all, thank you guys. Oh, and of course, thank you to the team at Arlington Independent Media for recording us. And as always, the recording will be up on our website, arlingtoncommittee100.org, and on the AIM YouTube site. So lastly, thank all of you for being part of our program, for bringing our topics, asking your questions, and as always, we do hope to see you again next month and beyond that. Thank you for joining this evening. Look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you.